these tips from. So where did you grow up?
I actually grew up on the other side of the county, so not too far from here.
So this is your hometown?
Give or take, Westchester. I lived in a bunch of northeast cities in between, but settled back not so far because I guess I like it.
What number child were you of how many kids?
I was number one of three. I have two brothers.
Two younger brothers.
I do.
The leader, okay.
I do.
What sports did you play and then? Growing up.
Whatever they had, pretty much. I did a lot of running. I played a lot of soccer. I tried my hand at some gymnastics. Definitely softball. There was no like field hockey and stuff like that, but sadly, or lacrosse at the school I went to, but it didn't matter. I was happy to play base tennis, whatever. I was happy to be outside. We did a lot of outside play, free play, back in the day.
Unobstructed free time.
Yes. So no parents watching. It was totally beat on each other.
Mostly just because it was available, or was it like, did you have an athletic family that was sort of like athletics first, or was it just kind of naturally part of your?
I think it was just, I was definitely driven.
It was more you.
Yeah,
okay.
I think probably.
All right, and then how old were you when you started in this sport, and like what was your key distance? We already learned you've done Kona, your second Ironman out, it sounds like.
Yes, well I did college sports. So that was probably, so I did high school and then I played, I did
track and soccer?
I did track and soccer in college. So that led me into running, and then actually the story is that I live across the street from Kate, and when I moved into our house like 24 years ago, that weekend there was a bike on her car, and I was like, that looks pretty cool. I wonder what she's doing with that bike. And then the first race I ever did, I think, was like the Taconic Biathlon, which she got me to do. And it was some kind of thing where you ran like, I don't know,
3 miles.
It was 3, I thought it was a little long. Okay, we ran 3 and then we had to swim.
You run first.
You run first and you swim. This was back in the day when you could drown, get a cramp.
Yeah.
But I had never really done any open water swimming. So I did get to the water first, and then I basically couldn't swim. I just went there, and people passed me. And then at the end, some guy came up to me and he's like, if you ever learn how to sight, you're gonna have a future here. So I was like, okay, I guess I have something to learn, I mean, that's the thing. You make mistakes, you learn from your mistakes. And so after that, I was like, all right, let's get in the water and let's figure this out.
Oh, that's really
funny.
That's my experience was the run, kind of the same thing though, but it took me a while to get over it. All right, so then how did you go from that to this? You ended up going into psychology, you became a psychologist for a period of time.
No. I went and got my PhD in clinical psychology. My dissertation, though, honestly, is on the mind-body stuff. So it's on anxiety, performance anxiety, and how that impacts illness behavior, basically, like stomach aches and things like that. And I did what everybody does. They use a college population, which is the easiest group. And so I think I was already sort of into that kind of mind-body thing. And while look, clinical psychology is great, love it, very different dynamic, right? You're sort of sitting with people for a very long period of time, sort of like dealing with their stuff. And while I liked it, I think I was not, the idea of crisscrossing it with sports was just like, I was like, now this is what I want to do. It's like you talk to your kids and they're like, well, I figure out what I like. And I'm like, you have to figure out what you like, because then you don't mind. I really don't, I'm perfectly happy to like turn on a YouTube of Michael Phelps talking about himself for any given evening, or a documentary on like who knows what. Like, I really like it. And I think that was sort of the overlap. It was probably a little bit of starting to train people. I got my OCT license, and then I was sort of like, how does this all sort of fit together? And then I started thinking about it. And I think for me, it was a little bit, look, the mental skills are how you approach performance. Some people have a very natural way, but a lot of people don't, right? And there's a lot of anxiety or mistakes and things like that. And you realize that the skills are like, they're eminently trainable. And really, Olympic athletes use them, and professional athletes use them, but somehow they don't really trickle down so much that they're in the ethos, right? But they're not that hard. And so I think I started sort of focusing on the people I was working with, and then I sort of started to move to like, okay, what about high school students and college students, and I went back and obviously I got some certifications and that kind of thing. and then I was sort of like, it just fit together.
It just all kind of came.
It kind of came together.
Kind of called you as you saw it out.
It did. It worked out well.
Yeah. So we'll get to more specifics about how you define like that mental edge and what is in and out of that bucket in a second. But why is it crucial in triathlon?
I don't know if it's any more crucial in triathlon than it is in anything, right? Performance is performance. I mean, I think that sport performance, and what I say, so I do work with a lot of high school students and a lot of college students, and I work with a fair number of teams. I work over with Rye Country Day, and what I often say is like, these are the same skills, right, that you're going to use in your game today, but you're also going to use them in your next interview, or they might be in your next violin thing, or your next chess. Right? It's like a performance or sitting up in front, write a presentation, right? A lot of the things are the same, and a lot of the concepts. And so I think triathlon, like everything else, if you want to, your brain, it is the portal to your performance. So you can train a ton, and we've all seen people who train a ton and then just, don't perform up to what they can do. Right?
That's a great quote. Your brain is the portal into your performance. Like, we got that one. Bumper sticker. Okay. So let's just let's just put a framework out there of how so you come to this work, and tell us sort of just to set the framework of the conversation, what populations you work with for performance coaching, and sort of how you work with them on mental skills. Okay.
So, I think that, I really run the age gamut. So I've had like a 10-year-old, phenom runners, and then really all the way up to adults. I have like I think she's a rower, and maybe she's in her early 60s. And so, and she's really trying to, she's come to rowing new, and she wants to kind of hit it. So I do a lot of work with college students and high school students, because they're really in that space, right, where they want to perform, and maybe their parents or colleges or whatever. There's a lot of stuff there. And then I do a fair amount of, triathletes and people in our sort of age group, which is nice for me because it's easy. How do I work with them? And teams, I do teams.
Yeah,
too.
Teams.
I do teams, yes. And it's really, teams is like a little bit of a different dynamic, right? Because one of the big things is like, what's the dynamic on the team, the cohesiveness, the support, and some of the skills and some of the issues sort of feed in, and I'll mention it when we talk about them, but they're the same. It's just they're applied to more people. So what was the last question?
It was who do you work with and how do you work?
How do I work? So generally, I see people anytime. It's like a really different time, like 4-6 times, something like that. And then they get back to me, and I see them I have basketball players. I'll see them 4 times, and then I won't see them for like 4 or 5 months, and then I'll get a text. They need to come back. They're like infamous for this. And then, which is fine. I really love that. And when I think of people, I get back to them all the time. And I'm like, so how is it going? Where are you? How is school? And so it's kind of nice, because then I have these relationships with all sorts of people. And
so it could be like one dialed in very specific issue, or it could be sort of a global. This
absolutely.
seems to be better than last season. I'm not sure how to get there.
Sure. People come to me typically. People come to me mostly for performance anxiety issues, confidence issues. They practice better than they play, and that's a big one. I would say those are like the big 3.
The big things.
Yeah. Okay. Mostly performance anxiety.
All right. So now we're just gonna play a little bit for 2 seconds and talk about what we're talking about here. So like a little quick hits game of what are the tools in the mental edge basket? Is the tool I mentioned in the basket, or is it not in like the mental edge basket, just for fun? Okay. So the first one would be powering through pain in workouts. Is this a good thing to do for mental edge, or no?
Okay. Powering through pain, definitely not in the mental edge basket. It's not like a skill that I would say, but is it something that you can, provided it's not with injury, it is something that you can definitely use to improve your mental game.
Ice baths.
Sort of similar. Also, it's a pain, something you sort of learn to tolerate pain, but it's not necessarily something in your basket.
Magnesium supplements.
Or good for sleep and cramping, but not necessarily in your basket. Nutritional supplements, there are 4 or 5 that I think probably really help with triathlon, but not in your basket.
Vision work.
Mental imagery, definitely in your basket.
Saunas.
Definitely improve performance, ergonomic aid for sure, but not in your mental skills basket.
Meditation.
In your mental skills basket, yes.
Breath work.
Yes, in your mental skills basket.
Training with others below or above your level.
That would be fun and community, and I think it probably teaches you things, but not in your mental skills basket.
So not like work to get above or below. Only taking on what you know you can do.
Playing it safe. I think playing it safe works maybe if you're coming back from injury, maybe if you have some confidence issues, but I'm not sure that I think that that's necessarily the way to go. Take some risks.
Mindset.
Mindset. What do you mean mindset?
Fixed or growth mindset is.
Oh,
like
fixed
in
or
your bucket
growth.
or not.
Oh, little Carol Dweck. I mean growth for sure. Take the risks.
Self-talk.
Definitely your mental skills basket. So maybe I take that second and right at the end there.
Yep.
So when I work with people, I basically see it like this. There are sort of like facts of success, right? So, and you take those letters, F-A-C-T-S, right? Facts, the F, that would be focus, right? Focus is a superpower for athletes, no doubt, right? The athletes that can maintain and sustain focus where they want it tend to perform better. What's the problem? We all lose focus, right? We all lose focus. You're driving, you forget where you're driving, right? We all lose focus. You're on your bike, you want to keep this power range and you realize you're way lower, right? So focus is really difficult. Also, focus in the moment, right? Not on the swim that didn't go well just before or the time that you want to hit at the end, right? You need your focus right here and right now. If we sort of go from the perspective that focus is a superpower, and if you want to run well, if you want to bike well, if you want to do anything well, you want your focus here. The way I like to think of it and the way I talk to athletes is any other place you put your focus is literally a leak out, right? You've just lost some of your power. You gave it to your competitor maybe, or you gave it to, you just gave it away. You're thinking about the outcome, you put it ahead of you. You're thinking about the mistake you just made, it's behind you. So how do you keep your focus in the moment all the time, right? And so that's the F. A has to do with anxiety or arousal control, and that is your ability as an athlete to be self-regulated. And it's really, really important, right? That you don't get really anxious or really angry or, and you're able to manage that. Happens a lot in team sports when things don't go well, right? You see your tennis, we've all seen the tennis people like smashing their rackets down. These are the types of things, right? The self-regulated athlete is the one that will generally do the best. Then you have C and confidence. Confidence, very, very unstable trait, but also has the highest correlation with optimal performance. So how do you keep your confidence up, right? How are you proactive with your confidence? It's really important. And there's a whole bunch of ways to do that, and that's a lot of people who come in with anxiety. We end up talking a lot about their confidence because that's really the base issue is their confidence. And then trust. And trust is sort of this ability to sort of kick back and have a good time. Right, I think Ken said it before. So to just like trust your training, right? At the beginning you remind yourself, I put in what I had, let's just see what I've got, right? I'm not gonna be overly judgmental today, I'm not gonna be really hard on myself, I'm just gonna let this day roll, and then afterwards, I might need to do a postmortem, and that's fine. But I'm just gonna let today roll, right? And nobody has a great day every day, and that's just life. So those are sort of the facts. And then there's a bunch of skills that play into those facts. And that's like self-talk. What are you saying to yourself? And I cannot tell you the number of athletes I've had sit across me when I say, well, what do you say to yourself? And I'm like, I don't say anything. Oh, really? You don't say anything? So really what my job often is awareness, right? What are you saying to yourself? Because as I think Ethan Cross says in his book Chatter, we are all constantly talking to ourselves. It's really just a question of tapping into it, right? So self-talk, goal setting, routines, pretty much mental imagery and mindfulness. Those are like the 5 skills that I mostly work on with people, and we go into each one, or depending on what an athlete's really interested in, and those play back to those facts of success. And that's kind of how I work with people. Yeah. And it's probably easy, so you can sort of see what's in the basket if I say it that way.
Yep.
Okay.
Those things also are not easy to do, like the skill of self-talk understanding what you're saying can take a long time to do, probably even working with you, helping us bounding for, right?
Right.
And goal setting, routines can be difficult, mental imagery, mindfulness, I don't know, self-talk just seems like the hardest one there of all of those is it?
I think it really depends on the person, and I think the idea with self-talk is that you are starting early and either writing out or practicing, right? You asked me before, training with people that are better than you or training with people that are worse. I think the idea is that in any sort of training time, you're using those periods to figure out what you want to say to yourself and practicing it. You're doing your hard bike ride, or you're in a spin class and it's painful. What are you saying to yourself? Okay, let's decide, and now let's practice it. Because that's the same thing. The more you practice something, you set that groove, and then you get into your race and you have a routine, right? And you know what you're saying when it hurts. I know this hurts, but I know I can do it. Let's go. 2 more minutes, 5 more minutes, just this hill, whatever it might be. You start to get a routine in the way that you work with yourself to push through.
So in that vein, can you share a practical mental skill or ritual athletes could use the night before or morning of a race? So if you're practicing it, you could practice it for your workout, but...
The night before. Okay, so what I would obviously say is, just like you are training, right? Swim, bike, run, zillions of hours, like you have to train these skills too. I mean, it's like your limbic system, your sort of emotional brain, that will hijack your frontal lobe every single day. So if you're not if you haven't sort of practiced, you're not going to get as much bang for your buck. The night before, sure, you can do breath work, you can do mental imagery, you can do things, and I often work with athletes in that way, and it really does work. It really does work well. And I've had a number of athletes who really, particularly with mental imagery, it really helps them to imagine, they know they're going to the start line the next day, they know they're going to be anxious. Okay, what are you going to do? All right, well, I'm going to take 5 deep breaths. I'm going to sort of talk myself through that. I'm going to say, I'm happy to be here. Yes, I'm nervous, but, quote, and as hackneyed as it is, pressure is a privilege, right? I'm here because I want to be here. And, and so we sort of work through, and you can really do that in mental imagery, right? It's like you get the reps without being there. And I think it can be a really powerful tool, particularly with anxiety.
Yeah, when we were talking about having this conversation, you said, think of how many hours everybody puts into training their body and just like all the reps and the daily blah, blah, blah.
Crazy.
And then like, here's your brain and your mental landscape, like how much is in this bucket compared to this? Like almost none, really, so.
I would say that most of the time I speak, like if I say here, how many people use any of these tools? Okay, I've got 1, 2, okay, there's like 4 or 5 people. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. It's better than 0. I can tell you when I do it, high school and college students, I get a big fat 0. Unless I've already spoken to them, and then they're like,
we're gonna power on because we're gonna try to cover a lot.
Okay, go.
How do you help athletes reset after a bad race or a training setback?
That's great. I'm so happy when people have bad race or training setback, because really that just means you're human. So, I mean, look, I have had many not great races. I think the idea, look, we learn a lot from when we don't do well. You heard my story before about my not swimming straight. The second time I did Kona, I pretty much, what I would say would be, I'm not going to use the phrase. But afterwards I came back and I was like, okay, I went out a little bit too late. I didn't acclimate to the heat. Okay, I think I really overtrained, right? But it took me time. I was upset and whatever. But I think that then you sort of come back, you come up with your hypotheses as to why, right? And then you put some kind of plan in place.
Yeah.
Right? What can I do differently? Okay, I really need to pay attention to overtraining. I really need to pay attention to my recovery. I really need to pay attention to my heat acclimation. I mean, if you're going to a hot race, I know for myself, like Wednesday to Saturday, that's not gonna be enough time. So when I went out to Kona the 3rd time, I gave myself, I think, 8 or 9 days, and it was a huge difference. So, you learn from those things. The only thing I would say in this vein is, I think people are really good at learning from their mistakes and their failures, but I would say you really have to learn from your successes too. So when you have a good race, you really need to do the same thing as when you have a bad race, right? Because what are the things that got you that good race? Right? And so one of the things I do with all of my athletes, whatever, it may be after practices, it may be after games, is what are 3 things that you did well, right? Because I'm constantly trying to work on confidence, right? So what are 3 things you did well? And then what are 2 or 3 things that you want to do better next time, right? Because you're trying to keep yourself feeling confident, but you're also trying to move yourself forward. And we get better at the things we pay attention to. We get better at the things we do. I often say, I work out a lot, but if I went to Zumba tomorrow, I'd be wrecked, right?
Right.
But then if I went to Zumba for a week or 2, I'd be okay at Zumba, right? And so if I focus on it, I'm going to get better at it. Your mind and your body are looking for that kind of adaptation. You just have to dial it in.
So now take this to a case where you're recovering from an injury, or you get injured. Like now your mindset's a completely different place to start.
And that's look, I work with a lot of injury. I work with a lot of people with injury because we're human and we have injury. For me, I've had like 3 massive surgeries, so I am pretty good at injury. And coming back from it. I work with a lot of D1 athletes with injury, and I think injury is hard and it really messes with your head. You lose, what happens, one of the big things with injury is you lose confidence, right? And so it becomes a question of building your body back, but also really building your confidence back. And so I was just working with a D1 rower guy, and he had an injury, and he just couldn't get over where he would have been had he not had the injury. He just, every time we met, he was like, every time I go to practice, I'm thinking of what I could have done. Every time I look at the guy sitting next to me, I'm thinking about what I was doing. And I was like, okay, you can keep doing that, but is it helping you? And that's a fair question, right? Is what you're doing serving you? And he was basically like, actually, you're right, it's really not. And so we decided in one of those, like, okay, this is now day 1, let's go from here, right? And you are here, and now you're gonna move forward. And what I think is you need wins, right? So we had him set small performance goals. So performance goals are something I often work with people on, and that's sort of things you can control. So effort, attitude, preparation, mental game, things you can control, and you set them. If you set them, you're much more focused on them and not so much focused on the outcome, which can really raise anxiety. And I mean, he did great. He set some nice ones. We met 4 or 5 times, and then he was like, I'm good. And he went off, and he's so happy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I texted him recently, and he made it into the boat he wanted to be in, and he's feeling.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was great. So
focus on what you can control, not the things that are beyond.
That's right, and
yourself.
yourself.
Not where you would have been.
And yourself.
If you didn't have the injury. Like, how hard is that to?
Right, and injury as we age, it is like really a management thing, right? I mean,
but I like the
it's not
phrase,
if, it's when.
How well is that serving you? Because that just seems to cut through issues when people have a hard time letting go of where they were in that boat.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, let's go to race day mindset just for a few questions. How should athletes mentally prepare for different race distances, sprinter versus Ironman? Is there any difference? Mental preparation, the races are different distances.
Yeah, but really the skills are the same. I mean, you may be thinking to yourself, when you're deciding what your mental script is going to be, and I really do think you brought it up before, self-talk is really important, and dialing it in and deciding what it is really important. And that is a place that might differ a little bit, right? Because if you're doing a sprint, you're looking at redlining, that's like acute pain versus like, the more muscle pain from an Ironman, so you might have a little bit of a difference there. So, but by and large, the issues are the same, right? You want to come into it with sort of this calm focus, you don't want to be too judgmental with yourself, you want to just enjoy the day, trust your training, stay focused. The issues are the same. And that's why I can work with so many different sports, because the issues are the same.
So here's a similar situation comes up a lot, but what strategies are there for managing that mid-race anxiety when that negative self-talk starts to hit on all the hardest miles?
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I think I call it, it's that sort of lull, that sort of doubt. You're sort of getting at that sort of self-doubt in the middle when you're in pain and you sort of want to.
When your energy's depleted. And yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, look, preparing for that, it's going to happen, I don't think I've ever done an Ironman or even a half when, look, you fluctuate through a game, through a race, right? How good you feel tends to fluctuate. And sitting through that and sort of like staying with it and saying, okay, I'm gonna run to the next, food station, and then I'm gonna walk through the food station. I'm gonna run to that. Kipchoge talks about running from either tree or telephone pole to telephone pole. And I mean, he's, Kipchoge's mental game is clearly an impressive one. So I think that finding sort of spaces where you can chunk it, so getting into why, prepare yourself for the lull and having a sort of a plan and a strategy for how you're going to handle it. Because the truth is, it's going to happen. Like, it's going to happen. So what am I going to do when it happens? Right?
Think it through in advance.
Right.
So how do you help athletes stay focused in all those long hours? I mean, sometimes I actually like to not feel like I'm focused. Hit the music and it just carries you through a workout, right?
Mm-hmm.
So okay, you get the distance in, but how do you help them stay focused when they need to be focused? To be focusing on something like this, an attitude issue that might come up, or some other.
No, focus is tough, right? It's a superpower.
Yes, right.
Focus is a superpower. I mean, I think that it's clear that one of the more important parts of focus is like that you recognize when you've lost it. And so there's like 3 R's: recognize, regroup, and refocus, right? Mm-hmm. Because everybody loses focus. So when you lose focus, that's fine. Everybody's going to. How quickly did you realize it? And then what do you do to regroup? I mean, often with athletes, I'll say, take a deep breath, and now refocus. The best way, I think, to refocus is to have some type of word that anchors you back to what you're doing. So if it's a sport, like you're playing water polo, maybe you want to say, what's my job, right? Mm-hmm. And like, my job is to defend, my job is to score, right? And so that focuses you in. If it's running, you're sort of like, okay, right now I want to, I need to relax. I want to lengthen my stride. I want to tighten my core. So some kind of phrase or something that brings you back to your body and to this moment is the most helpful generally to get your focus back. But you're going to lose it.
Right.
Expect to lose it. Don't be upset when you lose it. You just bring it back. It really begs the question and brings up this sort of like new sort of focus in sports psychology, which is mindfulness. And this is the idea of this sort of third wave of psychology in general, but also sports psychology, because if you practice mindfulness, what really is mindfulness? And you go back to like John Kabat-Zinn's, definition, which is, paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And if you sort of break out those pieces for a second, you see why they're very applicable to sport, right? Paying attention on purpose, that's your focus, right? In the present moment, you need to be right here and right now to perform well, and you need to be non-judgmental, right? We're in that trust phase where we're just gonna go. So mindfulness for athletes can be incredibly useful. And I really do encourage, I have a little more trouble with high school and college students, not so much with adults, but to start to incorporate like 5 minutes on your Calm app once a day, because it's really very clear that mindfulness helps people sustain and maintain focus, regulate their anxiety, be more optimistic. There's even a little research to suggest it helps with pain tolerance. I mean, it's probably a really good tool in the box if you're willing to start a practice.
Yeah, mindfulness.
That's what I would say.
Anything that you would think would be different in preparation for like a super high stress event, like your first qualifier for Kona? If the stakes are like an extreme level of
right.
Yeah. Team or not?
That's a really good question, and that comes up a lot. It's so interesting. It's interesting, but the point, what really happens to people is as the stakes go up, so if what got you here is being in the moment, focused right here, using your performance goals and your process cues, And then you got to this next stage, but then everybody starts to focus on the outcome and they want to win, right? And so really the interesting thing is really just the awareness that as the stakes go up, we tend to move our focus to the outcome, but we really need to bring it back to the moment. And that's really it's well documented that that's just what people do. And so you have to sort of bring it back. And so that's one of the things I often do with teams at the end of the season and when they get into championship stuff, because they start to get really outcome focused.
Just bring them back, just write
Right.
that down.
What got you here? You
Right.
know? And it's the same for us, right? What got you here? It's all those hours of practice, right? It got you, you focused and you're right here, and now you're thinking about
To get there.
Yeah, and stay here. Don't go there.
Yeah. Easier said than done.
Don't leak it. Don't leak it. Don't lose it. Right.
Okay, how about somebody newer to the sport? So if somebody new to triathlon, what's one mental skill they can make, or new to mental training?
Well,
Don't have
that's
to be
what
new
I
to
would
sport.
say. You got I already was going to answer what you had. Go ahead.
That's it. Just what is the one?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is I think the most important thing I would say is that you start to establish your own sort of mental game, right? Pick something and start to work on it. Start to think about what would be the most helpful for me and what can I start to use and to embrace that, right? You spend so many hours on our bodies, but that 6 inches between your ears is really the arbiter of how you're going to perform. So what can you do to get that online, to warm that up, which is like one of the things we didn't talk that much about is like any kind of pre-performance routine. Like, what do you do the morning of a race? Do you just go show up and just kind of like do it? Or do you have a routine? Do you have a routine before your games, right? And the research on teams and athletes who have a routine is that they perform better. They've looked at it in the Olympics. They looked at wrestlers and various different sports. And then what basically having a routine does is it dials in your physical warm-up at the same time as you're dialing your mental warm-up, right? What am I going to think about? What am I going to say? How am I going to be proactive with my confidence? And so what I often have done a lot, again, with basketball players, interestingly, is set them up with a pre-performance routine, and teams as well. Like, what are you going to think for the hour before that game starts, right? And it's a lot of time, right? And so I'm going to warm up my body, and I'm going to think about what I'm going to say to myself. I'm going to, stretch a little bit, and I'm going to think about, sometimes I do something with people called a confidence resume, where you're actually answering a bunch of questions that's helping you to boost your confidence, right? Because if it's a high correlate, then you don't want to leave it to chance, right? So how can you boost your confidence? And so they're going to look at their confidence resume and that kind of thing.
I remember reading some athletes' pre-performance routines. Maybe it was Michael Phelps. I don't remember who it was, but that like scripted down to the very first thing that they think when they turn their alarm off.
That's right.
Like, I'm going to have this is going to be a great day thought, and then I'm going to do 3. But whatever it is, like every single thing is scripted. Really, whether or not they're going to warm up and all the stuff.
He
like
didn't
that,
leave a lot to chance.
Michael Phelps, right?
I mean, and he started doing mental imagery when he was like, 13, 14 with his coach Bob Bowman, and I mean, his mental imagery was like, he got so good at it, and he used both mastery mental imagery, which is everything going the way you want it to, and then also coping mental imagery, what's going to happen when it doesn't go the way I want it to. And there's this story about him, he had done that with losing his goggles in a race, and then in the final, in the Olympics, he lost his goggles in a race. And he talks about how he wasn't even really anxious about it. He had already prepared. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He already knew how many strokes to the end, and he still won that race. And it's amazing. I mean, what you can do with your brain.
Like a third leg to that was that he saw himself doing it, then he saw himself doing the wrong things and surviving it well, and then he also saw himself from being in the bleachers watching.
Yeah, third person or first person, you have options there. Yeah. I mean, when you get into a practice, like there's a whole bunch of ways to do it, and you want to make it multisensory, and the goal is to sort of like almost fake out your brain. And there's like, it's called functional equivalence. So if you can build your story and you're good enough at it, what you smell, what you see, what you taste, all those things, you can really get a lot of buy-in from your brain. And fMRIs have pretty much shown that people, your brain is working very similarly when you do it or when you imagine it.
it's really, I mean, when you think about what you just described, it doesn't really take that much time to sit down
It
and
does
think
not.
it through, and yet
It does
it's
not.
so hard to do it. I mean, it's like 2 or 3 minutes of sitting down and coming up with that and telling your brain that and setting it.
Well, that's one of
It's
the
very difficult to do it.
I really do. I mean, with college students, though, they will do the mental imagery, and then they'll check or send me a text that they did it, and we'll really start with like 3 days a week for like 5 minutes. That's it.
Envision your race.
That's right. Envision your race, or envision your next test piece, or whatever it is that you want to work on, and then they send me a text after they did it, and it works. It really works well, and they really find that it's and then once you have buy-in, then you don't really have to work anymore.
Then it's a
It
different
takes
thing.
it takes a few weeks, but then yeah.
What advice do you give to athletes overwhelmed by comparison? So especially training like a novice triathlete training against or next to an Ironman. Whether or not I know it, but just somebody who they think is much further ahead.
Well, I mean, what do you think I'm going to say?
It's gonna be in your head.
Right, and you're like you just gave over some of it, right? You just gave over some of your attention to somebody else, right? You just sort of
Right.
you just leaked it out, right? Are you doing their game or your game, right? And I think learning how to race your race, be focused on yourself. I'm not saying that people don't push you. That's true, right? But being focused on yourself is really where you want to be. And I think comparison is very natural, and I don't, there used to be a movement in sports like that. You could just stop your thoughts, and they called it thought stopping, and like you have it, you should just stop it, like just stop that thought. And I don't actually think that exists. You really can't stop thoughts. You can stop yourself from dwelling on a thought, though, right? And I use this all the time because I love it. You can't stop a bird from flying over your head, but you can stop it from making a nest in your hair. And I think that is the idea, right? And so it can cross your mind, and then you can say, okay, I'm just going to see what I have today. Right. And that's where we're going to go, right? Versus
well, it's sport triathlon, you see people running past you, and then you look, of course, at their age. And you're like,
yes,
or they're younger than me, so they're faster than me, or they're older than me, so they're more experienced, so they're faster than me. Like, there's always a way to spin that age so that works for you, right?
Right, but
leakage. Okay, got it.
Right here, baby.
One note about hormones. Can you explain why working with your hormones, whatever they are, to optimize performance matters, and how that you might change training approaches as a result of hormones when they change?
Okay. Yes. Well, that's a little bit. Okay. Men in the room, women in the room, both. Okay.
Right.
I mean, look. At this age, right? Everybody's hormones are declining. Although testosterone is really maybe a little bit more gradual and easier to manage than estrogen. Right. The cliff, or no, the craziness. I think that the other issue is that most of the research that we've done in sports and health in general is really been on the male body. So I sometimes wonder, we're sort of taught 90 RPMs for running, 90 RPMs for biking. That's really all based on men, right? We know that men get the most power out of 90 RPMs, but do women? I don't know. We actually don't know. That research is about men. So I think that, look, there's a lot of things that happen to women at this age, and then there are issues when you're still regularly cycling. Towards the end of your cycle, you don't realize how thirsty you are. You need more carbs. When you're going through the menopausal transition, there's all sorts of joint issues and injury issues that come up. So I think that being aware of your hormones and how they impact that is really important. And I obviously spent some time learning about it.
Yeah.
So
I have multiple more questions, but in the interest of time, I'd love to hand here and open to questions in the audience.
Would you talk a little bit about expectations and
Love it.
right behind that sort of judgment, and then also stopping and starting, and what gets in, to personalize it my way, but what gets in one's way?
Like obstacles you mean obstacles?
Yeah, emotional, mental obstacles.
Okay. Well, I think that expectations, big topic in this area, because really moving away from expectations expectations to the extent that you can. You know, we sort of talk about sometimes dropping them. I think it's really hard to do because expectations are those sort of strict, I have to, I must, right? I need to finish my swim in this, I need to do my bike in that, I need to beat this person,
Or I
need
want
to...
something for my time.
Right, I want something for my time, right? And so what you've done there is you've really focused on the outcome versus the moment, right? And so it really speaks to that. In addition to that, what it really does is it just raises your anxiety, right? And so when we're talking about regulation, it really makes that very difficult, right? So dropping expectations and bringing yourself back into the moment with both performance goals, those types of things that you're sort of striving for but that you can control, right? Your effort, your attitude, your preparation, your self-talk, right? And what I often have athletes do is make a list of performance goals for their swim, for their bike, and for their run, so that they have stuff they're focusing on, but it's not so much the outcome, right? It's those things. And so then irrespective of how they finish, they can be proud of, I hit my performance goals in this, right? When I lost the tension, I used the 3 R's and regained it. I wanted to negative split my run and I did, irrespective of what the pace was, right? I wanted to get through my transition, you know, without, you know, running with my helmet off, running into the run with my helmet on, right? So whatever they are, and they vary from person to person. And I think dropping expectations, and that sort of also plays in with triathletes to perfectionism, which we get a lot, and then that sort of plays into overtraining. And so all of that stuff sort of swirls around together. I think awareness is really important, and then I think bringing it sort of back and having these sort of smaller goals that are based on that really help pull away from the outcomes.
Thank you.
I do have a question about, and you've touched on this, and I think I know what your answer's gonna be,
Great.
but.
Then you're gonna ask it and answer it, and then we'll see.
When you've had, you know, when you've had a tough season, or you've had a bad race, you know, and the season's over, and then you're ready to start a new season, and you're like, I don't know if I can get over what happened last year. I don't, you know, whether it was an injury or you just lost focus, it was just a bad performance, you know, whatever. How do you reinvigorate? I mean, are there any tips for reinvigorating your, not reinvigorating, boosting your confidence, that you can come back on a new season after injury or after a bad race or after, you know, what are some things that you recommend?
Can I put it back to you real quick, Elizabeth? What do you got? What do you think I'm gonna say?
I think you're gonna say, focus on the here and now.
Okay.
Focus on your training and just work on that as opposed to thinking about the race. But no matter how much you may focus on your, you know, your weekly training and just kind of staying in the moment, you could have an overuse injury, you could have a something, you could have, you know, ran out of transition without your bib on or something stupid like that. So you just, you know, you lose your focus, and you know you're supposed to recenter yourself.
Okay, so
sometimes it's just hard.
could it be similar stuff, right? So you set performance goals, right? So those are sort of smaller things that you can control. So maybe that I'm going to use, you know, mastery mental imagery 3 times a week for 5 minutes, and I'm going to imagine the next race and it going well, and that I don't run out of transition with my helmet on or whatever, without my bib, right? And it goes perfectly, the race goes just the way I want, okay? And then maybe you alternate that with 2 days a week where you do a little mindfulness training, right? And so that's helping you with sort of focus and bringing your attention back, right? That's really what mindfulness is, right? You do some kind of breath work or whatever. And I tell people often, Insight Time or Calm app, there's so many of them, right? Your attention wanes, you start thinking about what you're gonna eat for dinner and you bring it back. And it wanes and you bring it back, right? And it's just a practice and you get better and better at it, right?
Practice at focusing, controlling your thoughts, not catastrophizing.
Right. And that's that idea, right? Is that in mindfulness, you're sort of letting those thoughts flow by, right? Okay, that could happen, but it might not happen, but okay, I thought about it, let it go, right? They say, imagine those thoughts on clouds or on leaves in the water or whatever floating by, right? And so it sounds to me like, I mean, those are two of the things I would say, okay, let's come in and talk about stuff, but those are two things I would do right out of the gate. Like, that's easy, and you've taken 5 minutes 5 or 6 times a week, and you're already sort of working on that. And then some performance goals too. That's where I would go, probably.
What are some major things you do today in your training, specifically, as opposed to before you learned everything that you've learned and got your PhD and everything? Because you were a competitive athlete before and you're a competitive athlete now. I'm just curious, like, what's different in your practice?
Great question.
In the way that I
In the way that
race,
you specifically personally train.
That is a good question, but yes, and it's interesting. I think that I am way more aware of my self-talk. So much more aware of my self-talk. And I do a lot, and I definitely practice a lot of self-acceptance. So if something doesn't go the way I want it to, I'm a little bit like, okay, all right, it didn't go the way I wanted to, what might be the reason, and then what might be my plan going forward. So having that, having a little bit more grace with myself, I think. I was definitely hard on myself, and I tend to be a perfectionist. So for me, that was really an important part of my process. I think that what I knew always, and I figured out in high school, was mental imagery worked. Right? I had a couple of situations where I was racing and I imagined the race like many, many times, and then I had really great races with really sort of like flow, holy grail flow experiences. And so I knew that worked, but what I really struggled with was perfectionism. And so really being able to sort of wind that back and allow myself to just, okay. And I've since had so many races that didn't go well, right? I said to you, that second Kona really didn't go well. I did SOS one year, and I got out of the first swim, and I mean, there's a lot of running, right? It's a bike, and then I ran, and I think I was well ahead, and I was really having a great race. I was so hypothermic when I got out of that swim that my frontal lobe was so gone, and I literally spent 12 minutes outside the water after that first swim trying to get warm. Really, you don't do that. You run. That's how you get warm, right? I mean, yeah. But okay, so, it was definitely a learning experience for me, and that was a really good example of that frontal lobe. You lose that. One of the things about anxiety, right, is that if you're really anxious, your frontal lobe goes offline. When your frontal lobe goes offline, you just don't think through. You make bad decisions, right? That's your executive function. But we sort of know that sort of old brain, it kicks in. And so managing your anxiety with breath work or meditation or other stuff is really important to keeping that frontal lobe in your race. And you're going to race so much better if you can make good decisions, right? Because no race goes as planned ever, right? Every race there's something, right? Something breaks, you don't feel well, you need to use the bathroom, you dropped all your nutrition. I mean, I've had so many of those things happen, and you're like, okay, how am I going to figure this out, right? And you want to be thinking.
When you work with an athlete who has an injury, do you do that mental imagery where you like imagine yourself healed and that helps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole different. Mental imagery is really quite the bag. There's really a lot of ways to use it. So I would have to say often it is in that form of mastery, helping with confidence, and coping, helping with things that might happen. But I think that imagine yourself healed, imagine your body healing itself, all of those things. I mean, mind, body, it's all connected, right? Right? I think it's worth it.
You talk a lot about self-talk and you think you should be really confident with what you're doing, but how do you make sure you kind of believe that? Because you can tell yourself as much as you want, oh, I am a good player, I am going to do well, but how do you actually get that? Because I can always say to myself, oh yeah, I'm a good player, but then at the end of the day, I know deep down, I think to myself a lot that I'm not, and I don't really ever believe myself.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really great question, and the point is that self-confidence is really unstable. And it's not just regular all of us, right? That is professional athletes, that is Olympic athletes, like everybody's struggling with their confidence. And so reminding yourself of the things you do well, right? Rather than just sort of saying to yourself in this open sort of way, I'm confident, it's rather, that's why sometimes making a confidence resume, which, talks about like the things you do in training that make you feel confident, the things that you do outside, your nutrition, your sleep, right? So it's sort of a list of things that you can look through that sort of help you to say, hey, you know what? I have trained a lot. I should be confident. I've been here, I once heard somebody with, every time they would go to a practice, they would take a rubber band or do a training session, they would take a rubber band and add a rubber band and add a rubber band. And by the end, right, you have like a ball. And you look at that ball and you're like, that is, I have a lot to be confident about. I've been training hard. These are all the outside training, but we forget that, right? And everybody over-indexes on failures and under-indexes on, so I think it's a work, and it's a work in progress. Sometimes what you can do, and I do have athletes do this, is either watch, if it's a particular sport, running, something like that, watch an athlete they really like. I had a young guy who used to love to watch Kipchoge run, and so before he went to races, he had this little video of clips of Kipchoge, and he would watch him run. But watching any sport that you might like, or yourself. So sometimes your parents have taken video, and what you can do is you can splice that together now online, which takes almost no time, put music behind it that you like, and you watch that before your game. You feel pretty good if it's you doing good stuff. So you have to be proactive with it. I think your point is right. It's hard to just say it and believe it. You gotta be a little more concrete.
Shelly, so being such a badass athlete that you are, what has been your darkest point in a race, training, in life, and how the hell did you get out of it?
Oh my gosh, that's hard. Okay, darkest point in a race. Well, I would say that SOS one was not that fun. I was like hypothermic and so that wasn't great. And in the end of that race, this woman beat me in the last like 20 seconds. It was really not that fun. Yeah, if I hadn't wasted those effing 12 minutes,
exactly.
It would have been a different race. So that was not a great day. I also think that second Ironman that I was overtrained for, that was kind of a really rough, that Kona was a really rough day. And the way that I managed that actually was, the run was just, I was pretty much just falling off a cliff. And I ended up running with this woman, so I must have been, I don't know, how old was I at the time? I don't know, in my mid-40s, I guess. But I ran with a woman who was maybe in the 60 to 64, and she was maybe gonna place in that. And so I ended up running with her and encouraging her, right? And I was a lot younger, so, the pace. And in the end, I ran it had to be at least the last half marathon with her, coming out of the energy lab all the way, maybe part of the energy lab and all the way back. And just kind of keeping her going and talking her through it and whatever. And she, as we got to a Leahy Drive, I sort of let her go and I didn't see her again. And actually I didn't even know what the results were. And then maybe it was the next day or 2 days later, I was in the tent buying that finisher stuff, and this woman comes up to me and she's like, "You are real! You are not an angel!" And it was her. And she dragged me over to her partner, and she was like, "Oh my God, thank you so much. I placed," and it was like,
oh my God.
And so it was not my best race, but it was a really good, it's not what I'll ever forget.
That's so awesome.
It
It helped somebody else, and it helped you get to
I
the
will
finish
ne-
line.
I will never forget it. And it's interesting because that really matters, and I tell kids that all the time, and that is that the research is that if you support somebody else, it actually makes you feel better and more confident, right? And so if you can say something positive to a teammate, to a friend, to somebody on the course, it actually, the research shows that you feel better too, right? And so, that is the beauty of this community, and I think I've often been on runs and in races where you sort of start running with somebody because you're with them, and it really helps both people, so.
But if that's her worst bonk
Yeah, well, I think I told you my 2 worst bonk stories. I don't want bonks, but yeah, those are my stories where I really, look, you don't always finish where you want, you don't always hit the numbers you want, but those were the stories where I really just felt like I was unraveled. But.
Yeah, I just have one other thing I want to raise. In the interest of time, we'll probably wrap. But I remember hearing that the SEAL teams they clearly train in mental resilience, right?
Oh my God, yeah.
But not only do they train in mental resilience for what goes wrong, but they also train in mental resilience for when things go right. So like, I was surprised when they said, like, you're just a bandwidth. They want your mental here. So you have something bad, it goes down, clearly they train you how to get it up. But if you're here and you're too exuberant, you're gonna lose focus just the same. I found that just fascinating. I hadn't really heard of that.
That regulation. Yeah, there's a story of I guess it's the Winter Olympics, the one where they have to sort of shoot or something. They skate and they shoot and they skate and they shoot. And it's a story of a woman, and I hopefully don't, kill it too much, but basically she gets to the final round and she's ahead. And being ahead, she's never been ahead before. And so she takes aim at her spot and she shoots, and she was actually aimed at the other one, right? And she doesn't win. She gets like 3rd or something like that. And she realized that one of the things that she did then was, in her mental imagery, she was like, I need to prepare for what it feels like to be ahead. Because that she lost focus, right? She wasn't sort of prepared for that. And so I think that there are a lot of stories like that, and sort of preparing for the range of emotions and how they impact your performance, right?
That happened to me in a business case.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that you were ahead and I wasn't prepared for it, and I adapted because I wasn't ready for it. I was a college student. It's just fascinating how it plays in both fields. Any other questions?
Is there like 1 or 2 books that you would recommend to get started with like learning mental imagery or any of these skills that you're talking about?
Oh my God, there's so many books. Okay, books. I mean, I do love Simon Marshall's book. I mean, Calm Athlete. You have to love that book. I mean, you have to sort of love him. Although,
What's it called? Calm Athlete?
yeah, it's really like I think it's like Calm the F Down, right?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
Calm the F Down, and Leslie Peterson is his wife.
Yes.
Is a professional triathlete.
Yes,
He's actually
that
passed
one.
away, right?
Yeah,
Right.
right.
But I really do love that book. I mean, I think it's really an entertaining book, and he was a sports psychologist, and it's really focused on triathlon.
Talks
mental
about
imagery.
the lizard brain.
Yeah,
Lizard, the
monkey. Is it monkey?
No, lizard.
Is it lizard? Okay. Sometimes they say monkey brain, lizard brain. Right. That brain of yours that just doesn't do what you want. And in that note, you have like the Tim Galway, the inner game of tennis, right? Which is, I think that's one of the early ones of just this, having this dichotomy. Mental imagery is a really good question. There aren't a lot of really good books on it, and I think that's one that probably needs to be written. I mean, there are some courses you can take, and I know Sarah has done some training in mental
There's
imagery.
Choice Point. That's the book.
Choice Point, okay. So Choice Point, you can
Yeah.
try that. So, I mean, I think anything by Matt Fitzgerald is really good. I think Steve Magnus does a really good job in a lot of running stuff. Dina Castor's book, I think, is excellent, and how she worked through stuff. I love Courtney Dauwalter's talking about the pain cave. Like, she's an ultra runner, like the best female ultra runner, one of the best, and she talks about her pain cave and like how she used to be afraid of it, and now how she's basically decorated it.
Yeah.
So I think that's great, and it's easy to hear her speak. I think you have a question.
No, it wasn't a question. Talking about that book that you just talked about with Simon
Marshall, yeah.
and Leslie.
It should be about them run or something like that.
Yeah, they came to a
I know.
Lake Placid
They told me, yeah.
camp for the Rye Tri Club.
Mm-hmm.
And the way Leslie upped her confidence level at the beginning of races, I just loved it.
No, she's little. She's
She's
little,
like
this
tiny,
big, right?
and she would stand with her hands on her hips and
Right.
just stick out her chest and think, I'm great and I'm gonna kill this race.
Fake it to make it, baby.
And I started doing that, and I'm not gonna say that I've killed all my races because I just do a race to be with friends and to finish.
Right.
I'm not gonna win anything.
But sometimes you
But
still
I
being
just
confident,
loved,
right?
I loved her like strongness in this little body.
Power pose.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
power.
that's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she's quite a woman.
All right, so before we let you go, how can people find you if they want to follow up with you?
Oh, website, I think my card's in the back. I'm really not that hard to find.
The why. That's
The
why I
why.
usually find you.
Yeah, you find the why, you find me, out swimming or
Thank
biking
you
or running.
so much for being here, Sarah, for setting it up. And all of you for